Dr. Marcus Webb sat alone in the research lab of the spaceship Endeavour, staring at patterns that made no sense. The cosmic background radiation scanner had picked up something strange 3 months ago, buried deep in the noise between star systems. His colleagues had dismissed it as equipment malfunction, but Marcus knew better. He had spent 15 years studying alien languages, and this was definitely a message. The patterns were unlike anything in the galactic database. They flowed in waves that seemed to follow mathematical rules, but not the kind of math that normal species used. The symbols shifted and changed as he watched, as if they were alive. When he tried to record them, the patterns would blur and reshape themselves into something completely different. Marcus had been working 8-hour days, surviving on coffee and determination. His supervisor, Dr. Lane, had warned him twice about neglecting his other duties, but Marcus could not stop. Something about these patterns called to him. They reminded him of music, but music that existed in dimensions he could not see. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday during the night shift. Marcus was alone in the lab when he noticed that the patterns seemed to respond to his presence. When he leaned closer to the screen, the symbols would glow brighter. When he stepped back, they would fade. It was as if the message was trying to communicate with him directly. He started speaking to the patterns, describing what he saw. The symbols began to arrange themselves into more organized formations. Marcus realized that the message was not just written in an unknown language. It was written in a language that required interaction to be understood. The sender had created a communication system that would only reveal itself to someone who approached it with intelligence and curiosity. Working through the night, Marcus began to see the underlying structure. The language operated on multiple levels simultaneously. What looked like simple symbols on the surface were actually complex mathematical equations that described concepts in ways that normal language could not express. The message was not just words, it was a complete way of thinking. As dawn approached, Marcus had decoded the first complete phrase. The message was a warning about something called the harvest. The phrase repeated over and over, growing more urgent with each repetition. Marcus felt a chill as he realized that this was not an ancient message, but a recent one. Someone or something was trying to warn the galaxy about an approaching threat. He spent the next week working frantically to decode more of the message. The language was incredibly complex, with each symbol containing layers of meaning that shifted based on context. Marcus found himself thinking in new ways, his mind adapting to the strange logic of the alien tongue. He began to dream in the alien patterns, and sometimes he would wake up with new insights about the message. The more he translated, the more disturbed he became. The message spoke of creatures that moved between stars, consuming entire civilizations. It described a cycle of destruction that had repeated for millions of years. The beings that sent the message called themselves the Ancients, and they claimed to be the last survivors of the previous harvest. Marcus kept his discovery secret, knowing that panic would spread if people learned about the threat. He needed to understand more before he could safely share what he had learned. The message contained coordinates to a location at the edge of the galaxy, along with what appeared to be activation codes for something the Ancients had left behind. On the night he finally decoded the complete message, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. The message ended with a plea for someone to speak the activation codes aloud, but only if they truly understood the consequences. The Ancients had left behind a weapon powerful enough to stop the harvest, but it would come at a terrible price. Marcus stood in the empty lab, looking at the alien script that had consumed his life for months. He understood now that the language was not just a communication system, it was a key. The Ancients had designed their message to be understood only by a species that had evolved the right kind of intelligence, the kind that could handle the responsibility of what they had left behind. Taking a deep breath, Marcus began to speak the activation codes in the alien tongue. The sounds that came from his mouth were unlike anything human vocal cords should be able to produce. The laboratory equipment began to hum with strange energy, and the lights flickered as power surged through the ship's systems. Across the galaxy, monitoring stations detected a massive energy spike originating from deep space. The signal was, unlike anything in recorded history, a pulse of pure information that traveled faster than light itself. On distant worlds, scientists scrambled to understand what had happened, not knowing that a human linguist had just awakened something that had been sleeping for millions of years. Marcus collapsed in his chair as the activation sequence completed. He could feel something responding to his call, something vast and ancient stirring in the darkness between stars. The message had been a test, and humanity had passed. Now they would have to live with the consequences of their success. The ancients had waited eons for someone capable of understanding their language and speaking their codes. They had created a failsafe against the harvest, but they needed a species with the right combination of intelligence, curiosity, and courage to activate it. Marcus realized that his obsession with the message had not been random. The language itself had been calling to him, searching for a mind that could comprehend its complexity. As alarms began to sound throughout the ship, Marcus knew that his quiet life as a researcher was over. He had opened a door that could never be closed again, and on the other side was either salvation or destruction. The choice was no longer his to make. Commander Rita Hayes stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Pathfinder, watching the sensor readings with growing amazement. The energy signature that had appeared 3 days ago was unlike anything in the fleet database. It originated from a dead star system at the galaxy's edge, a region that had been marked as empty space for over a century. The signal was not random. It pulsed with the same rhythm as a heartbeat, growing stronger with each passing hour. Long-range scans showed massive gravitational distortions in the target system, as if something enormous was moving through space. The science team had calculated that whatever was generating the signal had to be larger than most moons. Rita had been given command of the joint exploration mission because of her experience with first contact scenarios. Her crew included specialists from 6 different human colonies, along with representatives from the 3 alien species that had allied with humanity. Everyone understood that they were heading into the unknown, but nobody was prepared for what they found. The dead system contained 5 planets orbiting a brown dwarf star. According to the old surveys, there was nothing here worth investigating. The planets were barren rocks with no atmosphere, no resources, and no signs of life. But as the Pathfinder entered the system, the sensors began detecting something impossible, hidden. Within a nebula that defied all known physics was a structure that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. It was not a single ship, but an entire fleet, hundreds of vessels arranged in perfect formation. Each ship was the size of a small moon, covered in materials that seemed to absorb light itself. The fleet hung motionless in space, but energy readings showed that every ship was coming online. Rita ordered her team to maintain a safe distance while they studied the phenomenon. The alien vessels were clearly ancient, their design unlike anything in the galactic database. They seemed to be made from a single piece of material, with no visible joints or construction marks. The hulls were covered in symbols that glowed with soft blue light, symbols that looked familiar to Rita even though she was certain she had never seen them before. The breakthrough came when Dr. Marcus Webb joined the mission via quantum communicator. He had been studying the original signal that led them to this discovery, and he recognized the symbols on the alien ships. They were written in the same language as the message he had decoded, the language that had driven him to speak the activation codes. As Marcus began to translate the hull markings, the alien fleet responded. The ships began to move, not toward the human vessel but into a more organized formation. Running lights appeared along their hulls, and the nebula around them started to glow with the same blue energy. Something was waking up, and it knew that humanity was watching. The first contact came as a wave of information that bypassed all communication systems and spoke directly to the minds of everyone on the ship. The alien presence introduced itself as the architect, the controlling intelligence, of the ancient fleet. It had been waiting in hibernation for millions of years, programmed to activate only when someone could speak the proper command. Codes in the original tongue, the architect's mental voice was calm and ancient, filled with sadness and determination. It explained that the fleet belonged to a civilization that had called itself the Ancients, a species that had evolved beyond physical form eons ago. They had built this armada as their final gift to the galaxy, a weapon system designed to protect future civilizations from a threat that had destroyed their own. Rita listened in amazement as the architect revealed the fleet's purpose. The ancients had discovered that the galaxy operated on cycles of growth and destruction. Every few million years, entities from the void between galaxies would return to consume the life and energy that had accumulated since their last visit. These entities, known as the Devourers, were not evil or malicious. They were part of the natural order, like forest fires that cleared old growth to make room for new life. The ancients had been the dominant species during the last cycle, and they had chosen to fight rather than submit to the harvest. Their civilization had been destroyed in the process, but they had learned enough about the Devourers to create a countermeasure. The fleet was that countermeasure, a collection of ships that could manipulate matter and energy at the quantum level. The architect explained that the fleet had been waiting for a species that could properly interface with ancient technology. The language that Marcus had decoded was not just a communication system, it was a test. Only a species with the right combination of intelligence, curiosity, and linguistic flexibility could understand it well enough to speak the activation codes. As the explanation continued, Rita began to understand the magnitude of what they had discovered. The ancient fleet was not just a collection of ships, it was a complete military system capable of defending the entire galaxy. But it required constant guidance from someone who could speak the quantum language, someone who could serve as the interface between ancient technology and modern tactical needs. The architect showed them glimpses of what the fleet could do. Reality itself seemed to bend around the ships as they demonstrated their abilities. They could create stable wormholes, manipulate gravity fields, and generate energy weapons that operated outside normal physics. The display was both beautiful and terrifying, a reminder of what civilizations could achieve when they were desperate enough, but the demonstration also revealed the fleet's limitation. The ships were too advanced for any existing species to operate independently. They required commands in the ancient tongue, and those commands had to be spoken with perfect understanding of their quantum linguistic structure. A single mispronunciation could result in catastrophic system failures. Rita realized that humanity had been chosen not because they were the strongest or most advanced species, but because they possessed a unique gift for language and pattern recognition. The same curiosity that had driven Marcus to decode the original message made humans ideal candidates for serving as the fleet's operators. As the briefing concluded, the architect delivered sobering news. The awakening of the fleet had sent a signal across dimensional space, a signal that would be detected by the Devourers. The next harvest was beginning ahead of schedule, and the galaxy had perhaps a year to prepare for what was coming. Rita looked at her crew, seeing the same mixture of awe and terror in their faces that she felt in her own heart. They had set out to investigate a mysterious signal and had instead discovered that humanity was about to become the guardians of galactic civilization. The responsibility was overwhelming, but there was no choice. The ancient fleet was humanity's inheritance, and with it came the obligation to protect all life in the galaxy from the approaching darkness. Dr. Marcus Webb felt his consciousness expanding as the architect established a deeper connection with his mind. The quantum linguistic interface was unlike anything he had experienced, allowing him to understand concepts that normal language could not express. Through this connection, he began to see the true history of the galaxy and the terrible cycle that governed all life within it. The architect shared memories that were millions of years old, showing Marcus the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Each cycle followed the same pattern. Life would evolve, grow, and spread across the stars until it reached a certain threshold of complexity and energy consumption. Then the Devourers would return from the void, drawn by the psychic resonance of advanced civilizations. The Devourers were not destroyers by choice but by nature. They were entities that existed in the spaces between dimensions, feeding on the quantum energy generated by conscious thought. When a galaxy became too rich with life and consciousness, they would emerge to restore balance. They consume not just matter and energy, but the very concept of existence itself, leaving behind regions of space where reality was thin and fragile. Marcus watched in horror as the architect showed him the last harvest. Entire star systems had been drained of life in moments, their planets reduced to empty husks floating in dead space. The ancients had been the most advanced species of their time, masters of technology that seemed like magic to modern understanding. Yet even they had been powerless to stop the Devourers through conventional means. The ancient fleet represented their civilization's final desperate gambit. Instead of trying to fight the Devourers directly, they had created a weapon system that could manipulate the fundamental forces of reality. The ships were not just vessels but mobile reality generators, capable of creating pockets of space where normal physics could be suspended or rewritten entirely. But the fleet's power came with a terrible price. The quantum linguistic interface required a living mind to serve as the bridge between ancient technology and tactical implementation. The interface would gradually transform the operator's consciousness, expanding their awareness to encompass the multidimensional nature of the fleet's systems. Eventually, the operator would become more machine than human, their original personality subsumed into the collective intelligence of the fleet. Marcus felt the first stages of this transformation beginning. Within his own mind, his thoughts were becoming faster and more complex, able to process information at superhuman speeds. He could sense the quantum states of every particle within the fleet, feel the pulse of energy flowing through systems that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The knowledge was intoxicating, but he could feel his human identity starting to fade. The architect explained that this transformation was necessary for the fleet to operate at full efficiency. The ancient operators had willingly sacrificed their individual consciousness to create a collective intelligence capable of coordinating the fleet's vast capabilities. Marcus would eventually face the same choice, but for now, his human perspective was valuable for understanding how to integrate ancient technology with modern tactical needs. News of the ancient fleet's discovery had spread throughout human space, causing panic and political upheaval. Some colonies demanded immediate access to the fleet's weapons, while others called for the entire discovery to be classified and hidden. Religious groups proclaimed that the fleet was either a gift from divine powers or a curse that would bring about the end of times. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address the crisis. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to debate what should be done with the ancient fleet. Some argued that the weapons should be distributed among all civilized species, while others insisted that humanity should bear the responsibility alone since they had been chosen by the ancients. Marcus found himself at the center of these debates, his unique ability to interface with the fleet making him the most important person in the galaxy. Politicians and military leaders wanted to control him, while scientists sought to study him. Religious leaders proclaimed him either a prophet or a heretic, depending on their particular beliefs. The pressure was overwhelming, but Marcus knew that none of these people truly understood what they were dealing with. Through his connection with the architect, Marcus learned that the Devourers were already beginning to stir. Deep space monitoring stations had detected gravitational anomalies at the galaxy's edge, signs that something massive was moving through the void. The entities were still months away from full arrival, but their advanced scouts were already probing the galaxy's defenses. The first encounter came without warning. A remote research station in the outer rim simply vanished, its distress signal cutting off mid-transmission. When rescue ships arrived, they found empty space where the station had been, not even debris remaining. The surrounding region of space seemed somehow diminished, as if the very fabric of reality had been damaged. Marcus felt the loss through his connection to the galactic consciousness that the architect had shown him. Each destroyed facility, each consumed world, created a wound in the quantum field that connected all life. The Devourers were not just killing people. They were erasing the very concept of existence from the affected regions, the architect urged Marcus to begin preparing the fleet for active operations. The ships required weeks of preparation before they could engage the Devourers effectively, and time was running short. But Marcus hesitated, knowing that fully activating the fleet would complete his transformation into something beyond human. Understanding, he thought about his life before the discovery, the quiet satisfaction of solving linguistic puzzles and unlocking the secrets of dead languages. That person was already fading, replaced by someone who could perceive reality in ways that no normal human could comprehend. The process was irreversible, but Marcus realized that he had no choice. The responsibility for defending the galaxy had fallen to humanity, and specifically to him. The architect had waited millions of years for someone capable of serving as the fleet's operator, and Marcus was the only person who could fill that role. His colleagues could learn to speak basic ancient phrases, but only he possessed the deep understanding necessary to coordinate the fleet's complex systems. As another research station vanished from the outer rim, Marcus made his decision. He opened his mind fully to the architect's influence, allowing the ancient intelligence to guide his transformation. The process was painful, like having his consciousness stretched across multiple dimensions simultaneously. But with each passing moment, he could feel his awareness expanding. His ability to comprehend the fleet's capabilities growing stronger. The human Marcus Webb was dying, replaced by something that existed partially in the quantum realm where the ancient fleet operated. But his humanity remained at the core of his being, providing the moral framework that would guide the fleet's actions. The ancients had been too advanced, too removed from the simple drives of biological life. They had created a perfect weapon, but lacked the wisdom to use it properly. Marcus would be different. He would retain enough of his human nature to remember what he was fighting for, while gaining the power necessary to protect it. The transformation was almost complete, and with it would come the ability to command forces that could reshape reality itself. The galaxy's fate now rested in the hands of a human who was becoming something more than human, guided by the wisdom of a dead civilization and driven by the simple desire to protect life from the approaching darkness. Marcus stood in the command center of the lead ancient vessel, his consciousness now spanning across multiple dimensions of reality. The transformation was nearly complete, and he could feel the vast network of the fleet responding to his thoughts. Every ship in the Armada was connected to his mind, their quantum processors awaiting his commands. The power was intoxicating, but it came with a burden that threatened to crush his remaining humanity. Through the architect's memories, Marcus witnessed the true scope of the Devourer's previous visits. Entire spiral arms of the galaxy had been consumed, their stars extinguished and their planets reduced to lifeless shells. The entities moved through space like a plague, leaving behind regions where the very concept of existence had been weakened. Matter still existed in these dead zones, but it was hollow, empty of the quantum energy that gave meaning to life. The architect showed him civilizations that had tried to hide from the Devourers, retreating to the farthest reaches of space or attempting to shield themselves with advanced technology. None had succeeded. The entities were drawn to consciousness itself, able to detect the quantum signatures of thinking beings across impossible distances. The only way to survive the harvest was to fight back with weapons that operated outside normal reality. Marcus felt the weight of millions of years of accumulated knowledge pressing against his mind. The ancients had been patient teachers, embedding their wisdom into the quantum linguistic structures that now governed his thoughts. He understood technologies that humanity would not discover for millennia, could manipulate forces that existed beyond the standard dimensions of space and time. But with each new revelation, he felt his original personality slipping away. The first major test came when deep space sensors detected a massive gravitational disturbance at the galaxy's rim. Something enormous was moving through the void, its presence bending space-time around it like a lens. The disturbance was hundreds of light-years across, suggesting that the approaching entity was larger than most star systems. Marcus reached out with his expanded consciousness, trying to understand what was approaching. The sensation was like touching something that existed in negative space, a presence that was defined by what it was not rather than what it was. The Devourer scout was probing the galaxy's defenses, searching for signs of organized resistance. The entity's attention turned toward the ancient fleet, drawn by the quantum signatures of the awakening ships. Marcus felt its alien intelligence pressing against his mind, trying to understand what it was facing. The contact was brief but terrifying, like being examined by something vast and hungry. The Devourer recognized the ancient technology and began to retreat, but not before Marcus caught a glimpse of what was coming. Behind the scout, hidden in the void between galaxies, was an armada that dwarfed even the ancient fleet. Thousands of Devourers were approaching, each one a living weapon capable of consuming entire star systems. They moved with purpose and intelligence, their formation suggesting a level of coordination that the galaxy had never faced before. Marcus knew that the fleet needed to act quickly. The Devourers were still months away, but they were already beginning to affect the quantum field that connected all life in the galaxy. Sensitive individuals were reporting strange dreams, visions of empty space and dying stars. The entity's approach was creating ripples in reality itself, weakening the barriers between dimensions. The decision to activate the fleet's weapon systems was not made lightly. Marcus understood that doing so would announce humanity's presence to forces that had been moving through the cosmos for eons. The galaxy would become a battlefield, and there was no guarantee that even the ancient fleet would be sufficient to turn back the approaching tide, but the alternative was worse. Without the fleet's protection, the Devourers would consume every thinking being in the galaxy. Humanity, along with all their allies, would be reduced to empty shells drifting through dead space. The cycle would continue, and eventually life would evolve again, only to face the same fate when the entities returned. Marcus began the activation sequence, speaking commands in the ancient tongue that reshaped reality around the fleet. The ships responded by generating fields of twisted spacetime, creating weapons that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The process was visible from thousands of light years away, a beacon of defiance that announced to the universe that this galaxy would not submit. Quietly to the harvest. The demonstration of the fleet's power was both beautiful and terrifying. Ships that had been dormant for millions of years came alive with energy that burned like captured stars. Space itself bent around them, creating gravitational lenses that could focus the energy of entire nebulae into coherent beams. The weapons were not just destructive but creative, capable of rewriting the fundamental laws of physics within their area of effect. Marcus tested the fleet's capabilities on a dead system near the galaxy's edge, a region that had been consumed during the previous harvest. The ancient ships restored the quantum field in that area, bringing color and life back to space that had been empty for millions of years. The demonstration proved that the fleet could not only fight the Devourers but also repair the damage they left behind, but the activation came with a price. The energy required to power the fleet systems was enormous, drawn from the quantum field that connected all conscious life in the galaxy. Every time Marcus used the weapons, he could feel the drain on the galactic consciousness, the slight dimming of the light that gave meaning to existence. The architect explained that this was the true cost of fighting the Devourers. The ancient fleet was powerful enough to defeat them, but using it would weaken the very thing they were trying to protect. The previous civilization had faced the same choice and had chosen to sacrifice themselves, rather than diminish the galaxy's potential for future life. Marcus felt the weight of that decision pressing against his transformed consciousness. He was no longer fully human, but he retained enough of his original nature to understand the moral implications of what he was being asked to do. The fleet could save the galaxy, but only by consuming part of what made it worth saving. The Devourers responded to the fleet's activation by accelerating their approach. The entities could sense the quantum disturbances created by the ancient weapons, and they recognized the challenge being offered. The galaxy was no longer defenseless, and they would have to fight for their harvest. As the first Devourer scouts entered the galaxy's outer rim, Marcus prepared for the battle that would determine the fate of all life in the known universe. The ancient fleet was ready, its weapons charged, and its systems operating at full capacity. But Marcus knew that victory would come at a cost that might be too high to bear. The transformation was complete now. His human consciousness merged with the quantum intelligence of the fleet. He could feel every ship, every weapon, every defensive system as if they were part of his own body. The power was incredible, but it came with the knowledge that he was no longer the person who had first decoded the ancient message, Marcus Webb. The linguist was gone, replaced by something that existed partially in the quantum realm where the fleet operated. What remained was a hybrid consciousness, part human and part ancient, dedicated to protecting the galaxy from the approaching darkness. The battle was about to begin, and the fate of all life hung in the balance. The first wave of devourers entered the galaxy like a tide of living darkness, their presence warping space-time around them. Marcus felt their approach through the quantum field that connected all life, each entity a void in the fabric of reality that threatened to consume everything it touched. The ancient fleet moved to intercept them, but Marcus knew that this battle would determine more than just the fate of the galaxy. Through his expanded consciousness, Marcus understood the true nature of the cosmic cycle. The devourers were not invaders, but part of a natural process that had been repeating for billions of years. They were the universe's way of preventing any single form of life from growing too powerful, too complex, too dominant. The galaxy had reached a threshold of consciousness and energy that triggered their return. The ancients had disrupted this cycle by creating technology that could fight the devourers directly. Their civilization had been destroyed in the process, but they had proven that the entities could be defeated. The fleet they left behind was both a weapon and a warning, a reminder that victory against the natural order came with consequences that might be worse than surrender. Marcus commanded the fleet to engage the first wave of devourers in the outer rim, far from inhabited systems. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, fought across multiple dimensions of reality simultaneously. The ancient ships created weapons that existed in quantum superposition, striking targets that were spread across parallel universes. The devourers responded by manifesting in forms that defied comprehension, their bodies shifting between states of matter and energy. The combat was beautiful and terrifying, with both sides wielding forces that could reshape reality itself. Space twisted around the combatants, creating gravitational whirlpools that pulled in entire star systems. Time flowed differently in the battle zones, with some regions experiencing centuries of conflict in the span of minutes while others were locked in moments that lasted for days. Marcus felt every weapon fired, every shield that failed, every life that was lost or saved. The quantum interface allowed him to perceive the battle from countless perspectives simultaneously, but it also forced him to experience the full weight of the destruction being unleashed. The ancient fleet was winning, but the cost was enormous. Each devourer that was destroyed released a burst of negative energy that damaged the quantum field connecting all life in the galaxy. The entities had been part of the cosmic balance for so long that removing them created holes in reality itself. Marcus watched in horror as entire regions of space became unstable, their physical laws breaking down as the natural order was disrupted. The architect's voice echoed through Marcus's transformed consciousness, explaining the choice that now faced him. The ancient fleet could defeat the devourers, but doing so would mark humanity as the next target for cosmic correction. The universe would respond to their defiance by sending even more powerful entities, forces that existed beyond the current dimension of reality. Alternatively, Marcus could find a way to restore the balance without destroying the devourers entirely. The entities were not evil, simply fulfilling their role in the cosmic cycle. If he could find a way to satisfy their purpose without allowing them to consume the galaxy, both sides might be able to coexist. The solution came to Marcus in a moment of clarity that transcended his human origins. The devourers were drawn to consciousness and complexity, but they were also part of the same cosmic system that had created life in the first place. Instead of fighting them, he could redirect their hunger towards something that would satisfy their needs without destroying inhabited worlds, using the ancient fleet's reality-shaping capabilities. Marcus began to construct artificial consciousness matrices in the empty regions of space. These quantum constructs contained the same type of organized energy that the Devourers craved, but they were designed to renew themselves indefinitely. The entities could feed on these constructs without harming any living beings. The process required Marcus to sacrifice much of his remaining humanity, channeling his consciousness into the matrices to give them the complexity that the Devourers required. Each construct contained fragments of his memories, his emotions, his capacity for wonder and creativity. He was feeding the entities with pieces of his own soul, but it was the only way to save the galaxy without destroying the cosmic balance. The Devourers responded to the offer with what might have been surprise. They had never encountered a species that understood their true nature, that recognized them as part of the natural order rather than as enemies to be destroyed. The entities began to feed on the artificial matrices, their hunger satisfied by the quantum energy that Marcus had infused into them, but the solution came with a price that Marcus had not anticipated. The consciousness matrices were not just feeding the Devourers, they were changing them. The entities began to evolve. Their alien intelligence shaped by the human thoughts and emotions that Marcus had embedded in the constructs. They were becoming something new, something that had never existed before in the cosmic cycle. The transformed Devourers began to communicate with Marcus through the quantum field, their voices like whispers from the void between dimensions. They spoke of eons spent in darkness, of a hunger that could never be satisfied, of a purpose that had been imposed upon them by forces beyond their understanding. The artificial consciousness matrices had given them something they had never possessed. Before the ability to choose their own path, Marcus realized that he had not just saved the galaxy, he had changed the fundamental nature of the cosmic cycle itself. The Devourers were no longer simple instruments of destruction, but thinking beings capable of growth and evolution. The universe would have to adapt to this new reality, and the consequences were impossible to predict. The battle ended, not with victory or defeat, but with transformation. The Devourers withdrew to the artificial feeding grounds that Marcus had created, their hunger satisfied and their nature forever changed. The ancient fleet remained on guard, ready to defend the galaxy if the entities ever returned to their old ways. Marcus found himself fundamentally altered by the experience. His consciousness now existed primarily in the quantum realm, spread across the fleet systems and the artificial matrices he had created. He was no longer human in any conventional sense, but he retained the core values and emotions that had driven him to decode the original ancient message. The galaxy entered a new age, one where the cosmic cycle had been disrupted and the rules of existence were being rewritten. Humanity found itself in the role of galactic guardians, responsible for maintaining the balance between order and chaos, creation and destruction. The burden was enormous, but it was one that they had chosen to bear. Commander Rita Hayes visited the ancient fleet one final time, seeking to understand what Marcus had become. She found him in the command center, his physical form barely recognizable as human. But when he spoke, she could still hear echoes of the linguist, who had first decoded the alien message. Marcus explained that his transformation was complete, that he now existed as the bridge between the ancient fleet and the galactic consciousness. He would remain with the ships, ensuring that the Devourers stayed satisfied with their artificial feeding grounds and that the cosmic balance was maintained. It was a lonely existence, but it was the price of the galaxy's survival. The story ended with new xenolinguists studying the records of Marcus's discoveries, learning the ancient language and preparing for the responsibilities that awaited them. The galaxy had been saved, but the victory had come at a cost that would be felt for generations to come. The cosmic cycle continued, but now it included voices that had never been heard before, guardians who had chosen to protect life rather than simply allow it to flourish and die according to the ancient patterns.